Intervals. Well, in music, intervals refer to the linear, horizontal, or melodic distance from one pitch to another pitch, with a combination of whole and half steps. Harmonic intervals are...
Hey, Mr. Henry! Well, what did you just say?
I said intervals in music refer to the linear, horizontal, or melodic distance.
Wait. Well, what does that all mean?
Well, you know, horizontal, linear,
Oh, now, Mr. Henry, there must be a better way to understand this.
Okay, well, Mr. Quarternote is correct, so let's break this down a little. An interval is a fancy schmancy word to describe how close together or far apart notes are from each other, their distance. It's kind of like if music notes were put on a staircase. Let's say you had Mr. Quarternote on the first step and his friend was further up on the staircase. Right now they are pretty far apart. But if Mr. Quarternote's friend was here on the next step up, well, then he would be closer. So, when we discuss music notes that are far apart from each other or close together, we use that fancy word called an interval.
How sweet!
There are a bunch of different types of intervals out there. But let's go back to our staircase. So, Mr. Quarternote is on the first step and his friend is on the fourth step. If we counted the step Mr. Quarternote is on, then all of the steps up to where his friend is, we would say they are 4 steps apart, or we would use that fancy word, interval, and say it's an interval of a fourth. Let's look at the example of Mr. Quarternote on the first step and his friend on the second step. Count Mr. Quarternote's step as 1, then go up a second step. If we use our word interval, we would say this is an interval of, any idea? It would be a second. Okay, let's see if you can figure this one out. Mr. Quarternote is still chilling on the first step. His friend is now on the, do you see it? Which step is he on? If you said the third step, you are correct. So what interval would that be? We would say that's an interval of a third. Awesome. Okay, so that gives us some idea of the music word interval. But let's go a step further. Let's take away the staircase and add the lines and spaces to our music staff. Mr. Quarternote will sit right underneath the music staff with a line through it. That's a C note. His friend is going to sit on the first space of the music staff, which is an F note. Without the notes on the steps like we saw before, it's a little more difficult to figure out the interval. But the music staff is a lot like a staircase. Like said before, Mr. Quarternote has a line through his note head, which actually tells us that he is sitting on a line. If we go up one step, we find this note, the D note, which is on a space. Then we go up to the next note, which is on a line, and the next note, which is on a space. Do you notice a pattern? Line, space, line, space. If we go from a note on a line to a note on a space, that is just like music notes going up and down the steps of a staircase. Also, if a note is on a space and goes to a line, that too is just like music notes going up and down a case of stairs. So, if you count the line Mr. Quarternote is on as 1, then the D on the space would be 2, E on the line would be 3, F on the space is 4. Bingo! That means the distance from Mr. Quarternote to his friend is an interval of a fourth. So, that gives us some knowledge as to how these type of intervals work when we identify them on a music staff. But let's now check out what these intervals sound like. The major second, major third, perfect fourth, and perfect fifth.
Major second, major third, perfect fourth, and fifth? What are those all about?
What?
Great question, Mr. Quarternote. There are different types of intervals like major and minor. In order to really understand these intervals, you have to know about whole steps and half steps, which is in another video. So after you're finished watching this episode, check out the whole and half step video later on, which gives some more direction to understand major and minor intervals. For now, let's just focus on these intervals and how they sound.
Sounds great!
Let's start with an interval of a fifth. The perfect fifth is actually the interval heard at the very beginning of the Star Wars theme. Let's take a listen. La. And the second note, la, is what a perfect fifth sounds like. So if you have to identify the interval of a fifth, you could always remember it's the same two notes as the popular theme from Star Wars. La, la. Cool. On to the fourth. It sounds like this. La, la, which is the same as Harry Potter. Let's take a listen to the first two notes of Harry Potter. La, 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 la. Those first two notes, la, la, are a perfect fourth. On to the interval of a third. It sounds like this, which is the beginning of the tune. La, 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 oh, when the saints. So the first note, la, to the second note, la, makes up the first two notes of the tune, oh, when the saints go marching in. Then the interval of a second. It sounds like this, la, la, which is the beginning of the tune. La, 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 la. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. The first note, la, and the second note, la, creates the second.
Merry Christmas. Ho, 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 ho.
Wow, quick review. An interval is the distance from one note to another note. We learned about the second, third, fourth, and fifth. Are you ready for a challenge? Test your ears with this melodic listening challenge. Interval Madness, which uses the intervals we discussed in this episode.